Welcome to a night of total terror.
In 1968, George Romero brought us Night of the Living Dead. It became the classic horror film of its time.
We must not be lulled by the concept that these are our family members or our friends. They are not. They will not respond to such emotion.
Now, George Romero brings us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all time.
It gets up and kills. The people it kills get up and kill.
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
First came the night, then came the dawn. Now comes the most eagerly awaited day in horror film history.
Welcome back to Thursday of the Dead, episode 163. My name is Chase. As some of you might know, my first 100 episodes were called Dawn of the Dead Thursday. This started as a way to show off items from my Dawn of the Dead collection. Dawn of the Dead is not just my favorite horror movie, it's my favorite movie of all time. My friend Leif Jonker was originally scheduled to be a guest on today's show, but he had to back out because he's dealing with a family emergency. This episode is still going to be about the upcoming theatrical release of Dawn of the Dead 3D at the end of this month. Instead of Leif's words, I'm going to share some of my personal experiences in seeing what Leif was working on from the outside. Leif and I both have some friends in common, as he lived here in Sacramento many years ago. Our paths never crossed when he was here, but I remember reading about him in Film Threat magazine in the early 90s. His independent horror film, Darkness, got some positive coverage, and Film Threat was a distributor of Darkness on VHS. Those original VHS tapes are a big collector's item now. Leif and I first connected through his horror film fest in Wichita, Kansas. I answered a call he put out for artwork to be used to make mini posters, and the proceeds would go to a local animal shelter. It just so happened he was screening two of my favorite horror movies, John Carpenter's The Fog and Reanimator. I sent him scans of two paintings that I had that were inspired by those films. He sent me some mini posters to sign, along with postage mailed them back to him. Seeing those prints was inspiring to me. It was validation that my artwork was good enough to be reproduced, and it planted a seed in my head to make prints of my own at one point. Leif sent me some memorabilia from a few of his horror fests, including a t-shirt from his festival that I wear often. We've never met in person, but I started to ask him questions about his screenings, especially his screening of Dawn of the Dead 3D. More seeds were planted in my head. I was envious that he was showing Dawn of the Dead 3D, as I hadn't seen that version. I still haven't seen it as of this episode. As I've mentioned multiple times in previous episodes, my job at a local library was a catalyst for what became a 40th anniversary screening of Dawn of the Dead at the Tower Theater. I can tell you for sure that I would never considered hosting a 40th anniversary screening of Dawn if it wasn't for the conversations I had with Leif. Once the ball was rolling and I was prepared to deal with New Amsterdam Entertainment, I asked Leif for advice because he'd already dealt with them with Dawn of the Dead 3D. Even with his advice, the show almost didn't happen. There were things behind the scenes that were out of my control that I've now learned to expect. Dawn of the Dead was a stupid choice for my first screening. I've called it the Mount Everest of film licenses because it's probably the most difficult film to license. I got lucky, and it happened. Of course, my Dawn of the Dead screening was in December of 2019, and everything shut down soon afterwards in 2020. Leif confided with me earlier this year that he'd been helping Richard Rubinstein with licensing Dawn of the Dead for a few high-profile screenings. This led to him sharing with me that he was working on getting a nationwide release for Dawn of the Dead 3D. I was sworn to secrecy, which was tough, especially while hanging out with our mutual friend Albert, who brought up Dawn of the Dead 3D to me during lunch. I kept quiet. I have a lot of friends that love Dawn of the Dead the way I do, and I kept quiet on that too. Part of my motivation was my promise to Leif, and part of it was the realization that any word of it leaking out could have ruined the work he was putting in. Once Leif confirmed with me that there would be a wide theatrical release of Dawn of the Dead 3D, he asked my opinion on various poster designs that he'd come up with, especially when it came to options for the wording. During this time, he asked for my advice on how to replicate the legendary voiceover from the original trailer. I gave him some suggestions, and then he asked if I was able to come up with a version of the audio for the original trailer, only with the voiceover removed. My software that I use for that kind of thing wasn't working right, so I decided to recreate the audio from scratch. I had all the goblin music and the various library cues from the movie. I asked a couple people for advice on that one, including my friend Eric Kent from the Garf Network. I created a new version of the audio from the trailer, which Leif ended up not using for the actual trailer for Dawn 3D. But he did use some of the audio for the motion poster, which I think is pretty cool. Fangoria has a video up for it on their page. Here it is.
An all-new dimension of terror has been added to the ultimate zombie masterpiece. George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead is now in 3D.
Leif did send me a Dawn of the Dead 3D poster as a thank you for my help. I've included the trailer for Dawn of the Dead 3D in most of my episodes since it's been released, and I'll continue until the end of October. As for me, I have tickets to 2 different nights at the Regal Theater in my town. I saw the trailer when it played before Jaws 3D in September. If you're a fan of Dawn of the Dead, this is an event too cool to miss. Thank you, Leif, for all your hard work, and I hope all is well with you and your family.
In 1979, George A. Romero brought us the most intensely shocking motion picture experience for all time, Dawn of the Dead. Now, an all-new dimension of terror has been added to the ultimate zombie masterpiece. George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead is now in 3D. The original horror classic back on the big screen, uncensored, uncut, in 3D. George A. Romero's Dawn of the Dead in 3D.
Shoot it, man. Shoot it in the head.
Get tickets now on the Regal Movies app.